September 22, 2025, 22:48 p.m. Zaporizhzhia region, eastern Ukraine. The night was unnaturally calm. A low wind slid through the rusted transmission towers, carrying the scent of burnt metal and wet soil. In the distance, the Zaporizhzhia power complex glowed under the pale moon. Half ruined, half restored. A symbol Moscow claimed as proof of control. For the first time in months, nearby villages had light again. And for the occupying command, that light was worth celebrating. After a year of attrition, drone strikes, and failed counteroffensives, Ukraine had shifted strategy. The goal was no longer to storm trenches. It was to dismantle command itself. Intelligence units along the Dnipro intercepted encrypted chatter. A ceremony was being planned inside the plant to mark the stabilization of power in the occupied sector. Among the guests, senior officers from Russia's southern military district, including 2 generals overseeing Melitopol and Tokmak. What for Moscow was a display of permanence. For Kiev was an opening. Inside a secure intelligence bunker, analysts watched the preparations unfold through live drone feeds. The prelude to what would become one of the most precise strikes of the war. By 2117, a Turkish-built Bayraktar TB2 captured infrared footage of trucks arriving in convoy, headlights off. Soldiers unloaded crates of champagne and banners bearing the double-headed eagle. The scene streamed in real time to Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, the HUR. The order from Kiev was counterintuitive. Don't strike yet. For hours, artillery units requested permission to fire, but command insisted. Wait until the lights come on. Let them believe they're safe. Let the cameras record the illusion. Near Stepnohersk, Ukrainian sabotage teams moved through abandoned farmhouses, setting up thermal scopes and relay nodes. Each was linked to HIMARS batteries 40 kilometers away. Under the call sign Orion, they monitored every radio pulse from the plant. Every call, every signature. By late evening, confirmation came. 3 generals, 12 senior officers, and dozens of staff were inside the compound. The window had opened, and Kiev was ready to turn a celebration into fire. Floodlights bathed the courtyard in sterile white as loudspeakers played old Soviet songs. Soldiers laughed, posing beneath fresh Russian flags fluttering over the cracked cooling towers. A makeshift stage stood at the center, built from scavenged steel panels. Across it, a bold banner read, Zaporizhzhia. Power restored, victory secured. For Moscow's commanders, the symbolism mattered more than the plant itself. This wasn't an industrial milestone, it was theater, a promise of permanence. Russian state media had arrived to film the rebirth for morning broadcast. But 10 kilometers north, the silence was absolute. In a field shrouded by trees, HIMARS launchers of the 43rd Artillery Brigade stood ready. Coordinates confirmed, targets locked. Above them, a Punisher drone circled at 3,000 meters, streaming real-time infrared imagery. Every movement, every heat trace inside the compound was mapped with surgical accuracy. At 22:41, confirmation arrived from Ukraine's Electronic Warfare Division. Russian channels inside the facility had switched to ceremonial mode. External surveillance frequencies offline. The compound was blind, deaf, exposed. What happened next would take less than 5 minutes, but it would redefine the balance of fear across the southern front. September 23, 2025, 23:12 p.m., Zaporizhzhia region, eastern Ukraine. The silence broke like a breath released. For weeks, the plan had existed only in encrypted briefings and drone feeds. Now it arrived as fire. At 23:12, a swarm of modified commercial drones lifted from the tree line, gliding below radar toward the compound. They were expendable, silent, programmed to hit soft targets first. 2 struck guard towers and nearby fuel drums, their blasts erasing perimeter sensors in seconds. On live feed in Kiev, the compound's cameras flickered, blinded by smoke and electromagnetic interference. Moments later, the second wave came. Precision salvos from HIMARS launchers 50 kilometers north. Each rocket traced a sharp, perfect arc through the dark. Impacts tore into the command building, the generator hall, and the transformers that powered the celebration lights. The stage collapsed. The music cut to static. Inside, chaos replaced ceremony. Footage later recovered showed officers stumbling through haze, tables overturned, and a general caught mid-speech before the screen froze. A flash, then darkness. Overhead, a third element joined the strike. Electronic warfare. Mobile jammers flooded Russian frequencies, rendering local air defenses blind. Operators saw ghosts on their radars, decoys multiplying across the display. For 4 minutes, the compound existed in distortion, smoke, static, and panic. Witnesses described a layered soundscape, the crack of shattering metal, the distant pulse of rockets, then the deep roar as a transformer bank exploded. The fireball turned night to day, its light visible for miles. Drones redirected to record the aftermath. Burning fuel, silhouettes of bodies, and disoriented survivors moving through wreckage. By 2320, the strike was over. The compound was a skeletal ruin, scorched earth and twisted scaffolding. Communications failed almost completely. Garbled messages reached Moscow before going silent. Within the hour, the Kremlin labeled it a terrorist act by Ukrainian saboteurs, while local commanders rushed to lock down the perimeter and erase footage. Casualties remained uncertain, but satellite images at dawn told the truth. Thermal hotspots, collapsed structures, and fires still smoldering in the southern wing. The explosion had crippled power distribution across the region. Its real impact, however, was psychological. Russian troops along the front shifted to defensive postures. Panic rippled through radio channels. The destruction of a victory ceremony shattered months of propaganda. The message was unmistakable. Control was an illusion. Ukraine's channels stayed silent, maintaining deniability. But within Kiev's intelligence circles, the sentiment was clear. The enemy had been struck not just in strength, but in pride. As dawn approached, fires still burned inside the plant. Smoke carried east over the Dnipro, a visible scar stretching across the horizon. For civilians, it meant uncertainty. No power, no heat. For Moscow, it meant something worse. A loss of narrative, of order, and of fear. September 24, 2025, 01:04 a.m., Zaporizhzhia region. The fires still burned when the first Russian recovery teams reached the ruins. The plant's southern gate had folded inward, molten steel twisted into an arch. Smoke clung to the air, thick with fuel and ozone. Inside, medics moved through rubble under red flares, stepping over shattered glass and blackened banners. The courtyard where officers had toasted hours earlier was now a grave of uniforms and champagne bottles. For nearly 2 hours, Moscow remained silent. Then, at 0321, state media issued a hesitant statement blaming technical malfunction. Minutes later, it was replaced by harsher language. A terrorist strike by Ukrainian forces using Western weapons. The admission confirmed what satellite images already revealed. This was no accident. At dawn, drones captured the devastation. The main control block was gone, a crater 40 meters wide marking its place. Scattered copper coils glowed amid fires still burning around the storage yard. A torn flagpole leaned over the wreckage. For Kyiv, the mission had exceeded its goals. High-ranking officers eliminated, communications paralyzed, and frontline coordination disrupted for hours. Across the south, confusion spread. In Tokmak, radio traffic dropped to silence. In Melitopol, command staff abandoned surface positions for underground shelters. Even Crimea raised its air defenses, expecting follow-up strikes. The message was spreading faster than the flames. No one was untouchable. Ukraine claimed nothing publicly. But one cryptic post appeared from a defense-linked account. They waited for the lights to return. We waited for the signal to turn them off forever. Within hours, it went viral. Unofficial, yet undeniable. By midday, Moscow's media machine moved to contain the narrative. State television aired archive footage of past victories, while online analysts called the attack a masterclass in hybrid warfare. The strike had fused precision, timing, and psychology, allowing pride to become vulnerability. The economic ripples came swiftly. European energy markets surged 12% overnight amid fears of infrastructure escalation. Diplomats exchanged accusations. The Kremlin blamed NATO, while Western capitals praised Ukrainian resilience and ingenuity. Later that day, lists of casualties began circulating. Among the dead were Major General Viktor Yershov, responsible for southern logistics, and Lieutenant General Arkady Lebedev, head of occupation governance in Zaporizhzhia. Their deaths created a vacuum no press release could fill. Younger, inexperienced officers were hastily appointed, symbols of a structure shaken to its core. Even pro-Russian military bloggers began to question how such a publicized event could proceed without air cover. Some posts vanished. Others spread disillusion across the ranks. In Kyiv, officials observed the outcome with restrained focus. The footage spoke for itself. Control had shifted, and perception was now a weapon. The Zaporizhzhia strike had proven not only Ukraine's precision, but its psychological reach. That evening, as the fires dimmed and smoke drifted east, drones still circled above the ruins, not to attack, but to record, to ensure that the silence left behind would echo longer than the explosion itself. September 24, 2025, 09:26 a.m., Moscow. The Kremlin's operations hall was unusually quiet. Curtains drawn, phones confiscated. A digital map of southern Ukraine glowed with a pulsing red marker over Zaporizhzhia, not for land lost but for humiliation endured. The strike had shredded more than infrastructure. It had punctured Moscow's carefully staged image of control. Inside the secure room, the defense minister's voice was brittle. Reports were incomplete, casualty figures unverified, and one fact crystallized quickly. This had been precise, not fortunate. Someone inside Russian lines had given up time, place, or access. The silence after that realization was fear. State media moved to a sanitized script. Early bulletins blamed terrorist acts supported by Western intelligence and framed the damage as civilian. The narrative collapsed under open-source evidence. Telegram channels and independent blogs showed uniforms in the debris, charred vehicles with military insignia, medals half buried in ash. Censorship teams scrambled, but networked footage spread faster than control. In Kiev, the mood was clinical. Her command screens replayed intercepted distress calls, frantic reassignments, and attempts to seal holes in the chain of command. The operation validated a doctrine refined over 2 years. Attack command where it feels secure, and let perception do the rest. Across the front, the psychological effect was immediate. Units in Melitopol and Tokmak reported shaken morale. Some convoys moved north without clear orders. Drone footage later showed columns repositioning in disjointed flows. Withdrawals disguised as repositioning. Command uncertainty, not firepower, reshaped behavior. Internationally, the strike drew sharp analysis. NATO sources labeled it a turning point in precision asymmetry. Western capitals praised Ukrainian restraint while warning of escalation. Energy markets reacted. Gas and electricity futures jumped as markets priced the risk of further hits to infrastructure. Moscow did strike back, but clumsily. Cruise missiles targeted substations in Dnipro and Poltava, causing temporary blackouts but failing to reverse the strategic narrative. Inside Russia, purges and protocol changes followed. A Federal Security Service inquiry detained several officers in the southern military district. High-level reshuffles and tightened security for public events became tacit admissions that confidence had been shattered. In occupied zones, administrators canceled public ceremonies and moved families deeper into occupied territory. Command centers were hastily recamouflaged as civilian infrastructure. The visible effect was panic. The invisible one was erosion of trust, of authority, of the story Moscow had been telling. Kiev's leadership used ambiguity as a tool. President Zelensky's nightly remark, "Energy can be rebuilt. What cannot be rebuilt is arrogance," required no claim and delivered a message to both audiences. Reassurance at home, humiliation abroad. As the days passed, the Zaporizhzhia skyline kept a thin column of smoke. Locals called it the Pillar of Silence. In Kiev, new target maps went up. Red dots that were less about wreckage and more about narrative leverage. The battle had changed. From now on, every strike would carry both explosive force and a carefully calibrated story. September 27, 2025, 02:19 a.m., Eastern Black Sea. A convoy of Russian warships cut silently through the dark waters off Crimea. Radar signatures dim and sporadic. On the bridge of the frigate Admiral Essen, officers spoke in whispers. The order from Moscow was clear. Retaliate. Show strength. Hide weakness. The Zaporizhzhia strike had done more than destroy a facility. It had shattered the illusion of control. In the weeks since, generals were rotated, officers purged, and FSB investigators hunted for leaks that didn't exist. Yet no purge could restore authority. Every broadcast, every command carried the same undertone. Fear that Kiev was watching. The Kremlin needed spectacle. By early November, it had a name. Operation Storm Veil. Its goal, cripple Ukraine's power grid before winter. Mirror the humiliation of Zaporizhzhia. Western satellites soon tracked over 20 Caliber and Iskander launchers moving toward the coast. Their trajectories set for Dnipro, Poltava, and Kharkiv. At 04:23 a.m., the missiles launched. White trails slicing the night sky. Sirens wailing across central Ukraine. Explosions rolled across the steppe as grid sections blinked out. For the first time in months, cities like Dnipro went dark. But the blackout didn't last. Ukraine's air defenses, rebuilt since 2023, met the barrage head-on. Patriot batteries, mobile interceptors, and homegrown drones neutralized nearly half the missiles. In Kiev's control room, icons turned from red to green. Hits intercepted, lines restored. The intended show of power became a statement of fragility. Within 24 hours, 80% of affected grids were back online. Fire crews and technicians worked with calm precision, as if rehearsed. By the time Russian media declared massive energy disruption, satellites already showed Dnipro glowing again. In Moscow, triumph turned to silence. News anchors avoided the word Zaporizhzhia. The propaganda machine ran but out of rhythm. Across southern Ukraine, the response was immediate. HIMARS and newly supplied ATACMS missiles struck ammunition depots and field headquarters between Tokmak and Melitopol. Each attack was clean, timed, psychological. What began as an isolated strike had become doctrine. Decapitation, warfare. By mid-November, 7 command facilities had been erased. Russian officers stopped broadcasting locations. Public ceremonies vanished. The war's tone shifted from dominance to survival. Inside the Kremlin, frustration grew toxic. Advisors clashed. Some demanded escalation. Others warned that another humiliation could break what remained of political control. President Putin's addresses grew shorter, defensive, stripped of direction. In Western capitals, debate mirrored the tension. The Zaporizhzhia operation had proved Ukraine's intelligence reach, and the thin line between victory and escalation. Washington urged restraint, fearing that another high-profile strike might push Moscow beyond calculation. Kyiv listened, but remained silent. The war had entered its most dangerous phase. One fought as much through perception as through fire. November 3, 2025, 06:57 p.m., Zaporizhzhia region. Snow fell for the first time since the attack. The ruins of the power plant stood frozen and silent, fenced off by temporary barriers and watched by weary patrols. The air still carried a trace of burnt insulation, a smell that refused to fade. The place had become both warning and monument, the thin line between victory and vengeance written in steel and ash. Locals passed by quietly, some whispering about the night the sky turned orange, others gone for good, unwilling to live beside what they called the cursed zone. For the soldiers guarding it, superstition wasn't the issue. Memory was. This was where the balance of fear had flipped. Above them, a Ukrainian drone drifted in silence, not attacking, only watching, recording, remembering. In the months that followed, both sides would claim success and control, but none of it would outweigh that single October night. It had redrawn the war's logic. Precision had surpassed power, and information had become the sharpest weapon. For Ukraine, the lesson was clear. Every strike told a story, and every story could shape the war. For Russia, it came too late. In modern conflict, no celebration is safe, and no silence is ever empty. That night didn't just destroy a power plant. It destroyed certainty. It proved that victory could collapse in seconds, that control could vanish with one signal, one moment of exposure. The war was no longer fought with territory, but with intelligence, timing, and the power to see first. Soft ambient hum, distant wind. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It helps us keep these frontline reconstructions alive. And don't go yet. Click on the video appearing on your screen to see what happened next, when the Ukrainians let the Russians in.